Ladies and gentlemen, you are about to receive a code. Just 2 words, a declaration so fundamental that it forces reality to bend, dissolving delays, inviting coincidences, and turning the impossible into the inevitable. But the profound power of this code comes with one brutal, non-negotiable condition. These 2 words are sacred, not in a spiritual sense, but in a strategic sense. They are not meant to be shared with friends, family, or even with the world's opinion. The moment you voice your unformed vision to someone operating on the logic of the scene, you invite an intrusion. You trigger a biological response. Analysis is the enemy of assumption. Sharing your goal is an act of neurological self-sabotage. It floods your system with cortisol, the social threat response, breaking down the neural integrity of your new declaration. Doubt is not just a thought. It is a chemical reaction that steals the seed of your manifestation before it can take root in the subconscious. You are not here for affirmation. You are here for identity. Creation doesn't happen through effort or wishing. It happens through an internal shift in your psychological thermostat. You don't get what you want in this life, you get what you are. And these 2 words are the absolute, unyielding command that redefines the very core of your being. We are going to deconstruct the exact neuroscientific architecture of this power. You will learn how to bypass the default mode network and program your reticular activating system to see only the evidence for your chosen identity. This is not about positive thinking. This is about ruthless personal sovereignty. It is about becoming the person who already possesses the outcome. Stay with me, because this transformation requires radical silence, profound discipline, and unwavering, strategic intent. You have been taught to speak in order to inform, to explain, to describe what is. But the ancients understood a far more potent truth. Words are not vessels of expression. They are the womb of your world. They are the invisible, energetic structures with which your consciousness sculpts reality itself. Every inner monologue, every casual thought you accept as background noise, is a blueprint sent directly to the subconscious architect, the non-rational, infinitely powerful factory that manifests your consistent declarations. You are not speaking words, they are speaking you into existence. The material world is simply the delayed printout of your internal language. This is why it is not what you ask for that shapes your life, but what you declare, what you inwardly consent to be absolutely true. Right now, the vast majority of people commit the great tragedy. They speak their circumstances instead of their creation. They say, I am exhausted, I am trapped, or nothing ever works. They think they are reflecting reality. They are not. They are prescribing it. Listen carefully. These negative declarations are not reflections. They are commands, orders to the unseen mechanism of your life that obeys only one master belief clothed in word. The language of creation is not complexity or eloquence. It is identity. The phrase I am is the absolute declaration, the most powerful code in the known universe. When you invoke it, you define the unseen substance of your being. It is not followed by facts. It is followed by fate. Most of us have been trained to follow I am with lack, with limitation, because we were conditioned by a societal structure that mistook clarity for arrogance. The universe cares nothing for your volume. It listens only to your certainty. If a man affirms I am successful, but his inner psychological thermostat is still set to scarcity, which one wins? The thermostat, every time. You don't get what you want, you get what you are. The inner state dictates the outer result. The power of I am is not magic. It is Reticular Activating System RAS programming. The RAS is the gatekeeper of your brain, filtering the near-infinite data stream of reality down to what aligns with your dominant self-image. When you consistently declare a new identity, I am resourceful, I am abundant, you compel your RAS to automatically filter for, highlight, and prioritize the opportunities, people, and resources that confirm this declaration. This is the critical difference between a momentary affirmation and strategic reprogramming. But this shift in identity, this declaration of fate, must be protected. The early form of your vision is formless, and form takes shape best in silence. You must treat your I am declaration as a sacred vow, kept hidden from the friction of disbelief and the erosion of criticism. This is not about secrecy for fragility. It is about neural hygiene. When you share an unmanifested vision with those who live by the logic of the seen, those who prioritize observable facts over inner assumption, you invite analysis. And analysis, at a neurochemical level, is the enemy of assumption. Analysis from others registers in your brain as a social threat response. This triggers the release of cortisol, the stress hormone. Cortisol's primary function is to return you to a perceived state of safety, which often means regression to old, familiar, and limited neural pathways. The constant spiking of cortisol degrades the function of your prefrontal cortex PFC, the seat of executive function, discipline, and intentional self-definition. In essence, external doubt doesn't just plant a seed of negativity, it causes a chemical reaction that interrupts the formation of the new synaptic connections required to sustain your declared I am. Silence is not optional. It is the militant defense of your new neurological blueprint. You must shield the new identity from the chemical sabotage of external judgment. This resistance is not only external, it is evolutionary. Your brain is wired by the mismatch theory. For our tribal ancestors, conformity meant survival, while grand, exceptional ambition risked exile, which was a genetic death sentence. When you declare an I am that far surpasses the perceived limits of your social tribe, your primitive brain interprets this shift as a potential threat to your survival and triggers a profound urge for social calibration. This is the root of self-sabotage, an unconscious attempt by the deep brain to keep you safe within the familiar, constrained boundaries of the tribe. The intense feeling of imposter syndrome that accompanies the I am declaration is, in fact, your ancient programming screaming that you are attempting a dangerous deviation. Therefore, you must embrace sovereign loneliness, the conscious, disciplined choice to prioritize the absolute certainty of your future self over the immediate, debilitating comfort of tribal consensus. To sustain this sovereignty, you must capture control of your default mode network DMN. The DMN is the brain's background operating system, the place where your subconscious runs its default loops, generating most of your inner dialogue, your worries, and your core assumptions about self. If your DMN is running the script of I am inadequate, no amount of conscious affirmation will override it. The declaration must become the persistent, background hum of your being. The technique for achieving this is thinking from the end, or focused DMN rehearsal. Most people imagine toward their desire, placing it in a distant, uncertain future. This keeps the goal weak. You must instead place yourself mentally in the state already fulfilled, in the completed scene. Then, you look backwards from that state of ultimate arrival. This disciplined visualization is not fantasy. It is a neurological tool used to make the future so familiar to your subconscious that the current reality feels foreign. This process is violently opposed by the modern condition, the validation economy. Digital platforms have trained your brain to seek immediate dopamine hits from external approval, likes, comments, reflected validation. This addiction traps you in the reflection trap. The compulsive need to look at the world for proof that your inner state is working. You must break this loop. Your declaration must produce the evidence. It must never react to the evidence. You are not here to seek external confirmation for an inner truth. That is the noise. That is the delay. That is the ultimate vulnerability. Because the moment you utter your sacred declaration into the ears of one who lives by logic, you pull that declared word out of the womb of the subconscious and place it back into the courtroom of reason. And anything subject to reason must obey logic and the limitations of the seen world. The mystics understood this. The mystics lived by it in silence. What lives in spirit is not subject to logic. It is subject only to belief. You must become the unwavering guardian of your own inner structure. You must develop ruthlessness in identity selection, committing to the I am with such surgical precision that no conflicting thought, no careless phrase, no external doubt is permitted near the growth. Protect the early, formless structure of your vision as a mother protects a child in her womb. It doesn't need to be explained or justified. It needs to be nourished in stillness, in feeling, in disciplined thought. Silence is not weakness. It is the highest strategic act of protection. When you are gestating a new reality, speak less even to yourself. Let your declaration be brief, but bold. I am. Let the feeling carry more weight than the words. Let the assumption become so normal, so familiar, that you no longer feel the need to announce it. Because true power never explains itself, it simply is. You do not need to convince anyone of what you already are. This brings us back to the brutal, essential truth. Who you believe you are determines everything. This is not a matter of wishing. It is the function of the psychological thermostat embedded deep within your consciousness. You don't get what you want. You get what you are. When your internal identity hasn't shifted, when your thermostat remains set at struggle, lack, or unworthy, you can spike in behavior, attempt a new goal, or declare a powerful I am statement. But the momentum is unsustainable. Inevitably, you will snap back to the established identity setting. This is why lottery winners often lose their fortunes, or why people sabotage unexpected love. The blessing did not match the underlying self-concept. The energy required to maintain a reality outside your internal identity setting is simply too great. The core of this identity is managed by your default mode network DMN. The subconscious mind is not a repository of random memories. It is the operational base, the background hum of your entire system. If the baseline activity of your DMN is running the script of yesterday's limitations, I am not enough, I am always tired, then the conscious declarations you make during the day are just temporary noise, not the foundational structure. The I am must become the DMN's baseline assumption, not a fleeting, conscious thought. This inner shift is where the real resistance lies. It will feel like a lie at first. It will feel uncomfortable, delusional, and often triggers intense imposter syndrome. But we must understand this psychological phenomenon through an evolutionary lens. Your primitive brain views radical identity change as an evolutionary safety crisis. Your ancestors prioritized survival by conforming to the tribe's limits. Stepping into a grander I am challenges the assumptions of everyone around you, threatening to make you an outcast. Your own mind generates fear and doubt, the imposter feeling, as a flawed, protective mechanism to keep you small and safe within the familiar misery. To overcome this ingrained resistance, you must subject your new declaration to the iron test, a ruthless commitment to identity selection. You cannot afford to live in identity fragmentation, where you try on 1,000 potential selves gleaned from social media without committing to one. The question is your I am statement strong enough to stand against the criticism of your past, the doubt of your family, and the biological urge for safety? If the declaration is merely an affirmation, it will break. If it is an assumption hardened into conviction, it will hold its form. You must choose one identity and ruthlessly protect it, or your energy will continue to leak across countless conflicting possibilities. This discipline is profoundly difficult in the modern age because we have been surgically conditioned to seek external metrics for internal validation. We live in the digital Skinner box, where technology has trained our brains to become addicted to the reflected dopamine loop. This is the core pathology of modern manifestation failure. We are wired to scan the world, the phone, the mirror, and the bank statement for proof, a quick hit of dopamine from a like or a numerical spike to confirm the declaration we just made. Every moment spent checking your external reality for a sign, for a confirmation, or for evidence is a violation of the law of creation. You are training your brain to believe that the world holds the authority over your inner truth. This creates a state of proof dependency. Remember the principle: your word does not respond to the world. The world responds to your word. Your declaration must produce proof, not react to it. When you become addicted to the reflected dopamine loop, you are draining the creative energy directly from the seed you planted. You are looking for a reflection of the past, not the structure of the future. The simple act of repeatedly checking your bank account after affirming, "I am wealthy," is a profound act of self-sabotage. It is the subconscious mind reasserting the old reality by prioritizing the sensory data of the immediate moment over the conviction of the new state. You must learn to cut the social dopamine cord and redirect that focus internally. If the temptation to look for external proof is the primary obstacle, then the architecture of assumption is the mechanism designed to overcome it. We must cease the passive, unconscious imagining that dominates most people's lives, the constant rehearsal of rejection, failure, and conflict. The imagination is not a toy reserved for daydreams. It is the womb of experience. If you imagine consistently from the limitations of the person you used to be, you will remain that person. The critical task, therefore, is to seize control of your imagination and use it as a tool of embodiment. You must move beyond simple affirmation, the statement of desire, and enter the realm of assumption, the state of possession. This requires a precise and counterintuitive technique that the ancients understood perfectly. But the modern mind resists because it requires patience and a temporary rejection of sensory reality. Most people imagine forward. They look at their current circumstance, see the mountain ahead, and imagine the struggle toward the summit. This mindset traps them in the very reality they are trying to escape. Because as long as the desired outcome is imagined in the future, it is not truly believed in the present. And what is not believed now has no power to manifest. The alternative is to imagine backwards. You mentally place yourself in the future, in the state already fulfilled. You stand in the successful reality and look back at the journey that brought you there, not forward toward it. You acknowledge the journey with the quiet confidence of someone who has already arrived. You say internally, of course, this happened. I've lived it 1,000 times in my mind. This is not mere fantasy. This is applied cognitive science. The subconscious mind does not differentiate between real experience and vividly imagined experience, especially when it is emotionally charged and repeated. By imagining backwards, by engaging in this focused DMN rehearsal, you make the future state familiar. When the future becomes familiar, the fear evaporates. The doubts lose their voice because you have neurologically programmed your system to accept the new reality as the baseline. You must rehearse the feeling of the end. How does the version of you who is already successful walk into a room? How do they handle a sudden conflict? How do they invest their time? You must use your vision not as an escape, but as a discipline. You are engaging in intentional focus, forcing your reticular activating system, RAS, the brain's gatekeeper, to prioritize evidence of this new identity in the external world. You are making your nervous system comfortable with success. This focused discipline is the price of true transformation because there will be resistance. You are now operating outside the temporal expectations of the visible world. The outer world is merely a delayed, print out the tangible echo of yesterday's inner declaration. It is slow to catch up. The current mirror, the current numbers, the current relationships, these can only reflect the previous state of consciousness, the old thermostat setting. The temptation to check the mirror, to look for reassurance, to abandon the imagined reality because the outer world hasn't yet conformed, is the final severance point. If you fold too early, you train your mind to believe that only the visible is real, and in doing so, you sever the crucial link between your imagination and the manifestation mechanism. You are sacrificing your future self for the momentary comfort of the old, known reality. This is the moment to embrace sovereign loneliness, the conscious decision to prioritize the survival of your future self over the demand for immediate, reflected validation. You must hold the vision long enough for the world to change its script. Persistence here is not mere endurance. It is a structural necessity. It is the steady, relentless feeding of the DMN until the new identity is so firmly rooted that the world has no choice but to bend. This disciplined vision facilitates an actual shift in consciousness. It is not just a new thought or a better habit. It is a dimensional leap in identity. To move from who you were to who you are becoming requires leaving behind everything that felt solid, even if it was familiar misery. People say they want change, but they cling to their misery because it feels safe, certain, and confirmed by their past. The most critical action is to stop trying to achieve the new life and start inhabiting it. You stop struggling to reach a goal and begin acting from the assumption that the goal is the environment you already occupy. Assumption is not wishful thinking. It is an inner posture, a commitment to walk, speak, think, and act from a state that is not yet visible on your bank statement or your calendar, but that already exists in the field of potential. The question is, what state are you assuming now? Not occasionally, not when you are inspired, but habitually, unconsciously, reflexively. That continuous, foundational assumption is doing more to shape your future than any plan or checklist you've ever written. If you assume lack, you will manifest lack, regardless of the opportunities presented. If you assume rejection, you will interpret every silence as proof that you are unwanted. Your assumption is the lens, and the lens controls what you see, how you interpret the world, and how you act upon it. You cannot change what you keep assuming to be true. All circumstances, all outcomes, all people will just keep returning to the center point of your assumption like gravity. You are the immovable center of your own universe. And this is where the mantle of authority is placed upon you. The shift requires brutal, uncomfortable, liberating responsibility. You are not responsible for everything that has happened to you, but you are absolutely responsible for what you assume about yourself in response to it. That line, the demarcation between reaction and sovereignty, is the boundary between victimhood and authority. You cease waiting for evidence and start practicing the internal alignment with such commitment that reality eventually has no choice but to follow suit. You must sit with the new version of yourself in silence and rehearse. You imagine how they respond to criticism. You practice how they invest their time. You internalize how they handle abundance without flinching. And then, you start living from that state not all at once, but steadily, relentlessly. It will feel uncomfortable. You are meant to feel disoriented, because your old, limited identity is actively being disrupted. That disorientation is the necessary chaos before the restructuring is complete. If you can hold the assumption long enough, despite the sensory evidence to the contrary, despite the social discomfort, and despite the pull to regress to the familiar, you will eventually feel the new reality settle inside of you. You will no longer be reaching for a future self. You will be standing in it, because assumption, when sustained, becomes identity, and identity, when embodied, reshapes everything. This mechanism is the ultimate act of cognitive sovereignty. It bypasses the need for external validation, neutralizes the digital Skinner box, and redirects the creative force back into the only place it can originate, the unwavering conviction of the inner word. Now, the challenge shifts from creation to protection. You have architected the assumption. You have defined the sovereign identity. But your new identity, like a sprout pushing up through the soil, is incredibly vulnerable. If you are not vigilant, the weeds of old habits and external opinions will choke it out before it ever bears fruit. This is the part no one emphasizes. You must become the guardian of the growth. Right when you are doing the hard, disciplined inner work, that is precisely when the doubt comes knocking. Not when you are buried in chaos, but when you are close to alignment. When you are just beginning to walk like the person you claim to be. You will be tempted to utter a careless thought. Maybe this isn't working. Those statements, those small compromises, are not harmless. They are cracks in the foundation you have been building. Your words don't just build things, they also undo them. The moment you speak against what you have inwardly declared, even out of frustration, even as a joke, you are sending mixed signals to your subconscious, giving it permission to regress to the old limitations. You must become militant about your language, both internal and external. Not neurotic, but respectful of the power you now carry. This means no passive self-deprecation. No entertaining conversations that reduce you back to an older, smaller version of yourself. You protect the seed with boundaries, with focus, and with silence. The world, and even those who love you, will try to pull you back, because your change challenges their assumptions about who you are and what is possible. This is the final decision. Do you want confirmation from others, or do you want results? You do not get both in the early stages. There will be a necessary period of misunderstanding. People will say you've changed, that you are distant, that you think you are better. Let them. You are not living for their narrative anymore. You are living from the truth you chose. Loneliness is not emptiness. It is space, and space is precisely what your new identity needs to expand. You speak less, you listen more, you walk quietly, but with absolute conviction. And every time the doubt comes knocking, you remind yourself you have already spoken the word. You have imagined the end. You have assumed the identity. Now, all that remains is to guard the growth. Loneliness is not emptiness. It is space. And space is precisely what your new identity needs to expand. You speak less, you listen more, you walk quietly, but with absolute conviction. And every time the doubt comes knocking, and it will you remind yourself, you have already spoken the word. You have imagined the end. You have assumed the identity. Now, all that remains is to guard the growth. This is the final and most ruthless decision you must make. Do you want confirmation from others, or do you want results? You do not get both. Not in the gestation period. The world demands proof, but your role is to produce proof. If you seek external affirmation, You submit your inner decree to the validation economy, giving away your creative power for transient dopamine hits. You trade the future for a clap now. You must accept the inevitable period of misunderstanding. People who knew the limited version of you, even those who love you deeply, will resist the new one, not out of malice, but because your transformation challenges their deeply held evolutionary safety crisis. It threatens their assumptions about what is possible. They will say you've changed, that you are distant, that you think you are better. Let them misunderstand you. You are no longer living for their narrative. You are living from the truth you chose. Yes, it's lonely. Sovereign loneliness is the price of true creation. But you are not alone. You are simply prioritizing neural hygiene. You are refusing to introduce the corrosive cortisol of the social threat response into the fertile ground of your subconscious. Your silence is not weakness. It is the militancy of a dedicated architect. This leads us to the final, liberating responsibility. You must treat your declaration, that whispered "I am," as a sacred vow of identity. It is non-negotiable. If you speak against it, even in a moment of frustration or self-deprecating humor, you are sending a mixed signal directly to your default mode network DMN, giving it permission to regress to the old pattern. You cannot afford the cracks. You must become a guardian, a ruthless watchman over your inner dialogue. If it does not build the version of you are becoming, if it is not a focused DMN task, it does not belong in your mind. No passive self-deprecation. No entertaining conversations that reduce you. You protect the seed not because it is weak, but because it is becoming. And anything in the stage of becoming must be shielded. Your discipline now is the ultimate act of faith. Hold the line. Persist in the inner vision. Stay in the truth of your assumption, despite the discomfort, despite the external narrative, until the moment reality has no choice but to fold. It is a slow mirror, but it is an obedient mirror. The world will eventually catch up. When it does, when the results are undeniable, when the prosperity, the healing, the relationship shows up, they will ask, "When did this happen?" And all you will do is smile, because you will know it happened the moment you sealed your sacred 2 words in the silence of your own heart and told no one "I am." Now, go and keep the vow.